Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about three terrific discs, two of which contain splendid transcriptions of Grieg's chamber music. You know, we live in very interesting times. Before the advent of recordings, as I'm sure a lot of you know, if you wanted to make music, most of the time you did it at home. So you had to have a piano or friends who knew how to play music, and you played large orchestral pieces in transcriptions for chamber ensembles, for piano solo, for piano four hands, some kind of way to reduce these large works to a manageable size so that you could enjoy them in the comfort and privacy of your music room. You see, most homes had music rooms in those days because that was where you heard music. You couldn't put the radio in the kitchen because you had to have a piano or the record player or whatever. But if you were rich, you could have a pipe organ in your house with pipes stuffed everywhere. And that was a whole other market, actually, with piano rolls and things of orchestral pieces that transcribed them for the organ. But one way or another, if you had an orchestral work or work for a large ensemble, you had to boil it down to manageable size. But now, well, everything is recorded, first of all, so there's no reason to ever play music at home if you want to hear it, unless you like playing music at home. That's one issue. The second thing is that the exact opposite has happened, and it's so weird. I mean, frankly, weird. That is, chamber works are now getting blown up for large forces. Why? Because the world's conservatories have turned out heaping piles of musicians. We have piles and piles and piles of musicians who are often superb, and they need something to do and a way to earn a living. So they form chamber orchestras and ensembles of various sizes, and they need repertoire. And it's not just any repertoire. They need repertoire by major composers, because nobody wants to go see the latest modern unknown piece of something, because A, chances are it's junk, that's just the odds, right? People who like classical music want to hear classics. In other words, pieces that are certified masterpieces, and they've been around long enough so that we kind of know what they are. And something new has about a 1 in a billion chance of getting added to that canon of great masterpieces and being obvious as a masterpiece at first hearing. So that's one issue. So chances are it's a piece of junk. And besides, it's by somebody who you probably have never heard of. And people want to go hear music that they've heard of, that they like, by people who have names. It's a really interesting cultural phenomenon. And so as a result of this, we have large orchestra arrangements now of chamber works. And of all the composers who I think are probably best suited to this treatment, believe it or not, Grieg is one. Why? Because first of all, he wrote tons of piano music, a lot of which was orchestrated in his own lifetime. Some of it by him. That's number one. And number two, because he was well known for not writing music in large forms, which is not strictly true. He did write music in large forms. He just didn't write orchestral music in large forms. But there are large chamber works. There are the 3 violin sonatas, the string quartet, the cello sonata. You know, it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music. So there isn't any reason why we can't have Grieg for orchestra by doing a little bit of sort of tinkering to some of these chamber works. And that means there's now more formal sonata-style, large-scale symphonic Grieg, aside from the early symphony and the piano concerto. And it's great. So what have we got here? First of all, I want to just tell you about this absolutely spectacular disc on BIS, which has the Australian Chamber Orchestra under Richard Tognetti doing the String Quartet in an arrangement for string orchestra. Now, of course, arrangements of string quartets for string orchestra are legion ever since Mahler started blowing up Beethoven's late quartets and Schubert's Death and the Maiden. So that in itself isn't so unusual. But the Grieg quartet is particularly well suited to this treatment. Why? Because its style is not at all quartet-like. It's not one of those sort of contrapuntal 4 voices definitely a string quartet kind of quartets. In fact, it's written in double stops for pages and pages and pages in all the parts. Double stops are, when it means, when you pick a note on a violin, that's called stopping the note. You pick the note and then you play it with your bow. And if you pick two notes at the same time or on two different strings and play them both with your bow at the same time, that's a double stop. Violins can actually do triple stops. But the point is that this quartet is double stopped all over the place. And because of that, it doesn't sound like it's written for four independent voices. It's incredibly orchestral in sonority. And so it works wonderfully well when arranged for a string orchestra. In fact, you kind of wonder why it hasn't become popular in that form many, many, many years before this. But this disc, aside from having a superb recording of the string quartet in the string orchestra version, also contains two elegiac melodies. One of the lyric pieces, erotic, which sounds wonderful, but the fact is, erotic was not Grieg's natural mode of expression, shall we say. It's very pretty. It's a very pretty piece for string orchestra, and it probably sounds more erotic for strings than it did in the piano original, but even so, right? And the Holberg Suite. And the Holberg Suite, of course, is Grieg's own transcription for string orchestra of his piano original. So there's no reason why we can't have lots of string orchestra transcriptions of Grieg's piano music, but especially the string quartet here, which is quite lovely on this fabulously recorded disc on BIS with the Australian Chamber Orchestra under Richard Tognetti. However, the real reason I brought you here, the real honest-to-God reason, is because crack Norwegian violinist Henning Kraggerud has already recorded the three Grieg violin sonatas for Naxos extremely well. These are absolutely beautiful performances. His piano accompanist is Helga Kjekshus, and she's marvelous. And here's the really cool bit, because not only did he do one of the absolute reference recordings of the Grieg violin sonatas, which you should all own, he also turned all three of them into violin concertos. Yes! So now Grieg wrote 3 violin concertos. This is really a wonderful, wonderful idea. Why? Because the violin sonatas are all in 3-movement concerto form anyway. They're all fast, slow, fast. They're all about 21 to 23 minutes long. They're like a perfect length, and they make fabulous violin concertos. In fact, the way he scored them, and he made these arrangements, Kraggerud arranged these arrangements for string orchestra and just woodwinds, one of each, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon. It's an absolutely perfect ensemble for this music. It never challenges the violin in a bad sort of way, but it sounds absolutely charming and gorgeous and often pastoral and Grieg-like. I mean, just amazingly Grieg-like. If you're a Griegist, you'll think Grieg did them. I'm going to play you a sample, a comparative sample, so you can hear both. First, let's listen to the beginning of the beginning of the ending, the final movement of the first violin sonata in its original version, featuring Henning Kraggerud and Helga Kjekshus for violin and piano, as Grieg wrote it. Here we go. Okay, it's delicious, isn't it? Now, just wait one moment. I'll be right back with the orchestral violin concerto version. All right, now let's listen to Henning Kraggerud leading the Tromsø Chamber Orchestra in the finale of the first violin concerto. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't it work just perfectly? I mean, in a way, in some ways, it may even sound a little better. The piano part is lovely and it's more rhythmic for sure, but for orchestra, somehow, the piece acquires a certain meat on its bones, as it were, and it somehow, I don't know why, but for me, it sounds a little bit less, conventional maybe is the word. It does a little less expected because you have those flashes of woodwind color that add a whole extra dimension to the frame in which, the violin is operating. So here is the disc. It's on Naxos. Again, it's Henning Kraggerud with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and it's an absolutely wonderful first-class performance of all three Grieg violin sonatas arranged as concertos for violin, strings, and woodwinds. And I just think this is one of the great Grieg discs of the past couple of years. I mean, if you haven't had an opportunity to hear this, and I reviewed it on classicstoday.com, if you haven't had an opportunity to hear this, you owe it to yourself to get this as soon as you can. You will not believe how marvelous these pieces sound. And of course, so much of the credit goes to Kraggerud and the Chamber Orchestra for these wonderful, wonderful performances. They're not better, obviously, than the originals, but they're every bit as good. And that in itself is an epic, epic achievement. So keep on listening, folks, and I hope you enjoy these Grieg transcriptions. I just think that they're spectacular. Take care.